Our first speaker for this afternoon is Shahab Salemy. How about a warm welcome for our speaker?
Pretty cool. So thank you, good morning. I thought we'd start by asking you guys to think about a single word. Click. There we go. Healthcare. And I'm curious, when you read this word or think about this word, what images come to your mind? You may think about a visit to the physician, you may think about a hospital room, possibly you're thinking about the debate that's going on currently in Washington, but not terribly inspirational images. And I'd ask you, why is that? Our health is one of the most important things in our lives. It impacts everything that we do. It's been proven people who are healthier have more happier lives, they make more money, but yet we have this interesting binary relationship with our healthcare, where if you're not sick, you're healthy. So I thought I'd spend a little time talking about this, and maybe at the end of our talk, maybe we'll have a different impression of what this word means to you. So as was discussed, my background is actually largely in healthcare. So before Nike, I worked at a few large healthcare companies, the first one, McKesson. And so McKesson's actually one of the largest healthcare companies that very few people know about. So every year, McKesson generates about $200 billion a year, basically distributing pharmaceuticals. The entire business model is predicated on our need for drugs. And while it holds a very important role in our healthcare system, I think there's better options. I then moved over to medical device industry, to Medtronic, where we worked on hundreds of different types of therapies and devices to help humans have better lives. It also had a global impact. So every second of this great day, 2 lives will be benefited from a therapy that Medtronic develops. Again, great places for the world and great technologies that are helping us. But yet for all this work that these healthcare companies are doing, our healthcare costs continue to rise, we're still sick, the healthcare system is broken. So I started to think, why is that? And could there be a better way? So I started doing some research and came upon some interesting statistics. So the first, interesting enough, 86% of every dollar we spend in healthcare is spent on chronic diseases. That's over $3 trillion a year that we spent in essentially managing disease. And for all that money that we spent, still today, 7 out of 10 deaths in our country come from these diseases. We're simply managing diseases. We aren't actually working on prevention. So these are some somber stats. I was kind of uplifted as I came across some other statistics. The first is we can solve this. You and I can solve this simply by changing our behavior. So there's a recent study that the CDC put out that suggests that 70% of these chronic diseases could be eliminated simply by us changing our behavior. Simply by moving more, having a better diet, getting better sleep, better mental fitness, we can simply turn around this trajectory. And this isn't new. The wellness industry is actually $3.7 trillion, 3 times the size of pharmaceuticals. So there's a lot of companies and others thinking about this. So there's encouraging trends. I'll also give you our secret weapon in this fight, our youth. So the Gen Y and Z generations. Currently today, they're about 50% of the population in the US, and they have actually a completely different relationship when you think about healthcare. So Goldman Sachs recently put out a study. It was interesting. They asked baby boomers and they asked Gen Xers, when you hear the word healthy, what comes to mind? And the single biggest answer that came back was not sick. Again, having this very binary relationship with health. When they asked the same question of a younger generation, their conversation was very different. They spoke about exercise, they spoke about better living. They actually have a very different relationship in how they converse with it, and they're actually engaging in healthcare in a different way. Today, they spend about a quarter of their income on health, but where they spend on health is interesting. They're spending money on fitness classes, they're spending money on healthy diets, they're spending money, frankly, on sports apparel and equipment. And they're using technology as a way of engaging with healthcare. In fact, 75% of this generation uses some form of tracking to manage their health. So this is extremely interesting and exciting for someone like me as I start thinking about my own career and thinking about where do I want to have a shift. So I decided to make a change myself and change my own perspective of healthcare and decided to join Nike. And today, this is my image of healthcare. It's an image of inspiration, of motivation, of movement. It's a world where the physical world and the digital world come together. And what you're seeing here is just one of the many ways that a company like Nike is helping in this fight for healthcare. This is our NTC program. We do physical experiences globally. We also have a digital platform that have over 30 million downloads. And a lot of times when people think about Nike, they think about it as a sports brand, which is true. But our mission is a simple one, which is bring inspiration, innovation to every athlete in the world. And that asterisk is probably the most important part of our mission, which is that if you have a body, you are an athlete. And so it's been inspirational for me to work at a company like Nike who's trying to work on this conversation of prevention rather than intervention. And we're not alone in this fight. There's hundreds of companies who are working in the same place and working on that. And I think that's what's also interesting, is we're starting to see the change of conversation of different industries coming at this in a different way. So as I mentioned, the wellness industry itself is $4 trillion. And the companies that are starting to come into the space are having a completely different perspective. They're more consumer-focused, they're using technology in a new way, and they're leveraging their brands. So even in the past 5 years, we've seen entries from companies that historically were never in health. These are just a few. Over the last years, companies like Apple, Google, Samsung, Nokia have all built extremely large health platforms, whether it's Apple's HealthKit, Google's Verily platform, Samsung's S-Health, or Nokia's Withings platforms. They've all invested heavily in this idea of health because they know it's an opportunity for them to engage more greatly with consumers and also build a business off of. But it's not even just the large companies. We've seen a tremendous amount of investment from startups. In fact, over the last 3 years, we've seen a 2x rise in the digital health investment simply from new therapies and innovation. So $4 billion every year over the last 3 has been invested in digital health. And just like with any startup world, a lot of these models will fail, a lot of companies will fail, but there will be successes. And I think we'll see some really interesting companies coming out there that will change the way we think about our health. And beyond even the startups and traditional healthcare companies, we're starting to see traditional companies start to engage in healthcare platforms in new ways. So this is actually the new dash of a new concept car that Mercedes-Benz is putting out, and they're actually investing in a platform that they call Vitality Coach, which they're bringing health into the vehicle. So they look at your car's, what they would call the third place. So you have your home, you have your office, and you have your vehicle. And they're starting to engage in bringing sensors in the vehicles. They're actually creating mental health through mood and music as well as scent in the car because they see the opportunity in how to do this. So we're seeing intervention and innovation from multiple places, all trying to tackle this problem. And it's terribly exciting for someone like me to work in. So who's going to be the winners? And the reality is there's not going to be one winner. There's going to be several. There's not going to be one killer app. There's not going to be one killer company that's going to find out who the solution is going to be. We're going to see this forever because it's all of our problems. And every company has to have a stake in this game as well as each one of us. But I think there are some similar characteristics of companies who will define success from others. So the first is I think it'll be consumer-led. Our health and our wellness is a consumer problem. It's not a clinical problem. We will all have to take a position in that. And so companies and technologies who are putting the consumer first and leveraging technology, I think are going to be the winners. So people may be familiar with Amazon's Echo device. Amazon's projecting in the next few years they'll be making $10 billion worth of revenue from selling these Echoes. And whereas today people use this as for seamless commerce, they use it maybe to ask the weather, have it tell jokes. In the future, this will actually be a healthcare platform. You'll be engaging in this in a one-to-one relationship by getting understanding of your health, engaging with health, and your community. I also believe you'll see more integrated products and services. So today, the Internet of Things is here. It's been here for quite some time. It's projected this year that there'll be more connected product in the world than there are human beings, which is interesting. And those companies who are engaging this idea of integrating both physical and digital together will be the winners. So we're seeing here people are familiar with the Peloton platform. So basically bringing a spin class into your home. And if you'd ask Peloton, they would say they're a software company, they're a hardware company, they're a content company, and they found a way to digitally integrate this seamlessly for the consumer that's actually creating great traction. The third element is that we'll start seeing more platforms at the edge. So 10 years ago, Apple created the iPhone and created one of the greatest platforms we've seen in the last decade in the App Store. And every company over the last 10 years has been focusing on mobile solutions. And mobile will continue to be a critical component in how we engage in our health. But I'd argue that we're starting to see new platforms emerge, not just in mobile. We're seeing the connected home. We'll start seeing connected footwear and apparel. We'll see connected bikes, connected cars, and each of these will have their own ecosystem and their own cloud-based computing working together to solve the problem in a 360 manner. I also think we're going to start seeing hyper-personal solutions. So as we learn more about ourselves and we have data that's actually more one-to-one and getting that, we'll actually be delivering platforms that are more based on you rather than the many. So some people may have the Apple Watch or other smartwatches. These are the beginning of a conversation of how to become a one-to-one solution around engaging in our health. And I think are starting to be the trend of how we'll see future platforms being emerged. And finally, you'll see the power of partnerships. So again, I don't think this is something new. I think we all appreciate that it's very hard to go this road alone. And so I just picked two from my own background, where you're going to see companies focus on their own core competencies and then leverage others to where they need help. So Nike and Apple has been in a partnership for over a decade. It started 2006 with a puck in a shoe attached to an iPod to help you run seamlessly and capture your data. Last year, we introduced a collaboration on a watch for running experience, where we are both using our separate core capabilities to come together and accelerate our innovation. At Medtronic, we did a partnership with Ford. We're actually bringing remote glucose monitoring into the Ford system to help patients. Again, some unconventional partnerships, but helping both companies really accelerate their levels of innovation. So I've never been more optimistic than I am today about our health and the direction where we're going. And I think we've seen the models for success right in front of us. First, consumer need. Again, a $1 trillion industry of people, whether you're a boomer, a millennial, a Gen Y, a Gen X, are all super and highly engaged in. You're seeing investment from all types of companies, traditional and otherwise. And we're starting to see proven models that are breaking through. So I'm encouraged. I hope you're encouraged. And I hope as you kind of leave here today, you may have a different picture when someone asks you, what's your vision of healthcare? Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I've got some questions for Shahab, but I would like to encourage all of you that want to participate in the conversation to feel free to raise your hands as there'll be mics in the audience. So Shahab, I love your enthusiasm for what is ahead. What do you believe are a couple of critical things that need to happen in order for this to really become a reality, and certainly including the athlete, but beyond the athlete?
Yeah. I think one is just elevating the dialogue. So a lot of times when we think about our healthcare, it's something we think very personally, we keep to ourselves, we don't want to share. I think this idea of feeling comfortable with sharing that and expressing that is creating conversation that I think is extremely helpful. I also think we'll start to need to see some breakthroughs in some platforms and technologies like creating a model for others to follow. I think right now we have a lot of noise and a lot of companies who are trying. One or two successes in this market I think will really bridge the gap. And frankly, I think it's just changing our perspective of healthcare. Again, if you start thinking about healthcare less from a sporadic conversation you're having when you get sick, in terms of when you have to go see the physician or from an appointment, and rather every morning waking up with that as a mindset, I think completely changes trajectory.
So the technology will obviously play a really important role, but it also sounds like there's kind of education that needs to happen behind it, because as you're saying, there's a huge mindset that needs to happen. So it's beyond just the technology.
The technology will always be in the background. This is a war for behavioral change. It's about how we adapt the way we live, not the technology that's going to do that.
Do you see a time when we will be seamlessly sharing our fitness regime and our health data that's being collected by whatever devices is that we're involved with, to be seamlessly shared with our physician in a way that it will help with preventative medicine?
Completely. To be frank, I'm surprised we don't have that now. When I go to see my physician, like one of the first questions he asks is, how are you doing? How have you been? What have you been up to? And he has to do that in a 10-minute span because he has to go see the next person, because that's how our healthcare system is set up. If they had, we already see it in clinical settings. Remote monitoring is nothing new in the healthcare space, but to bring it down to, from a prevention standpoint, is something that's just a natural elevation of the experience, and something I think physicians will want, I think consumers will want. And I also think there's a different mentality of the physicians who's coming out of medical school today only believes in technology as the way the world works. And they're looking for those solutions and much more willing to engage, as much as the millennials are coming out and saying, this is how I want to engage in healthcare. And so when those two people come together and have a different conversation, I think it's just a natural evolution.
So at the heart of this is obviously some very sensitive data. So it's one thing for me to be sharing the number of steps I take each day, but as this vision that you've shared with us, which is evolving, do you believe that, or what do you recommend or think that manufacturers and companies that are going to be creating solutions need to be considering for the consumer to actually feel comfortable sharing that data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I kind of referenced that, I was surprised to hear that this year there'll be more connected devices than there are human beings on the planet. All these devices are capturing data of all various capacities. So I think it's a problem that everyone's going to have a point of view on. I think from the healthcare standpoint, I think one being highly transparent in terms of what information you're gathering, what's the benefit that you're trying to create. And then also I think we're going to have a level of comfort on what information we're willing to share. So I have all my credit card information on my phone. I use Apple Pay everywhere I go. I've gotten over the hump of this idea of worrying that my credit card information is going to be stolen. I think the same kind of change of behavior is going to come in our healthcare.
Okay. For the entrepreneurs and the investors in this audience, what would be some of the specific problems that you think that startups could actually deliver to be part of this? And, just in general, what kind of words of wisdom would you give them as they go forth? As you said, there's not going to be a killer app.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Not to reference too much what I already spoke about, but the idea of really focusing on consumer first. I think a lot of times when we see early companies, it happens when I'm at Nike, when I was at Medtronic, McKesson, a lot of people lead with the technology and talk about, well, this is an amazing technology that could do X. I think really leading with what is the X, why do consumers want the X, is critically important. The other idea is you don't have to solve the world's problems. I think with a lot of these technologies, the companies, when they come out, there's this idea that you're going to be the next, if I hear one more time the next Uber of healthcare, it's going to be a bit numbing, because you can't, I don't think, start with this idea that you're going to change the entire system with a single application. There's hundreds and hundreds of different problems, there's different use cases, there's different consumers. So having a very razor-sharp focus is important, consumer-led, and really putting technology in the background rather than foreground, I think is what's going to catch on.
And what about for companies in the audience that may want to partner with Nike? You mentioned, for example, the Apple partnership, and there's obviously a lot of big companies that you partner with. Is there an opportunity for smaller companies to partner with Nike, and what would you want to see from them beyond the laser-sharp focus? Are there certain characteristics or attributes that are important for them to come to you with?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things, and this may be more of a behavioral thing, is having the patience. And I would say not even with Nike or any other company, that this notion that just any partnership is a relationship. And so we'll use Apple as an example. It's not like that happened overnight and one day, Tim Cook and Mark Parker came together and said, oh, let's just partner, and we're just kind of went off the road. It takes time to nurture that relationship. So I think having the patience to nurture relationships, I think, is really important. I already talked about the razor-sharp focus. Really understanding what the problems that those companies are trying to face are critically important, because we have a lot of problems. Every large company does, and we're looking for solutions. And I would say that whether it's Nike or other companies, I do not know one large company that is not looking to partner more in more different ways with younger companies, because I think that's where you're going to see a tremendous amount of innovation. So the doors are open, I guess is the other way.
Are there any questions from you all in the audience? Yes, there's a couple right over here. They're bringing you a mic right now.
Thank you for your amazing presentation on healthcare. I have a virtual reality company, and we take assisted care facilities, folks stuck in wheelchairs and in beds, on trips around the world, so they can go to the pyramids of Egypt or wherever they visited in their life previously or never got the chance to go. But we're running up against HIPAA, right? So I have all these data points that I'm collecting. We do full sensory immersion. Not only can they see a beach, but they can feel a heat lamp. They can put their hand in sand. They can smell the salty air. They can hear a bird. All the senses, we need to collect that data so we can see, is a dementia patient improving by their 5th trip? But when you have privacy information versus the data that you can sell, where's that gray line between experiential entertainment and what is medically, you see what I'm saying, that gray area we're crossing right now. How do you anticipate dealing with that?
Yeah, I think, so I'll, full disclosure, I'm not a HIPAA compliant expert, so I'm not in the world deeply of healthcare today. But I do think there's going to be some changes in how we think about that from the government side, both from private and public sectors, frankly. Because I think where we've seen the greatest amount of innovation, sadly, has rarely come from government agencies or those areas. And so I think as we find more solutions, I think you'll see more change being demanded of the other side. I don't have a roadmap of what the gray lines is, because I think every use case is frankly different, and there'll be different areas to go. But I think I would continue to focus on the consumer side and then kind of allow the government, others to kind of catch up.
I think there was a question behind. Okay. Yes.
I'd like your response to this. In the last 4 or 5 years, there have been a number of randomized studies reported related to the efficacy of home monitoring and health. And they're noteworthy really for showing a lack of benefit. In fact, the biggest one 6 months ago in the Journal of the American Medical Association showed 2 groups of young people who did home monitoring in an attempt to achieve weight loss. And the group with Fitbit and home monitoring actually lost less weight than the control group. So my reading of the literature is there's really a lack of demonstration in controlled studies of the benefit of telemonitoring and home monitoring. Is it really something that is a self-confirmation? In other words, people use it who like it and want it, but when you try to move it into a realm where people are not necessarily adapters, essentially, does it not work?
Yeah, I think the idea around, I guess, the data leading, I think, is the issue there. Because I don't think it's about using these control groups. If the experience is engaging, if people want to come to it, and that's what's going to drive change, seeing how many steps you have every day, and it's the same because your behavior is roughly the same, eventually gets old. That's been proven. We've seen that in many places. So that's why I kind of stress the idea. It's not about the data. It's not about being able to be monitored. It's more the notion of what is the experience that's helping to support. And some people will use that in different ways. I don't think that, again, in the future, people are going to be excited about that over the course of the year I walked this many steps, but it is something they enjoy. And so like this idea of community is important, this idea of doing things that you love will drive that. I think technology in the background is what's going to drive that change.
Any other questions? So ultimately, with that, we think will there become a time when insurance companies will actually incentivize us to share information like the Allstate Safe Driver does, so that there will be a value exchange there? Yeah,
no, I mean, insurance companies have been doing these for decades, the whole carrot and the stick mentality, and so that's already happening. I think, will we see an acceleration from that? Absolutely. I continue to think that the solutions won't come from the insurers, though. I think they'll come, again, from consumer-led companies that then insurers will be adopting those models. Okay. We have time for one more question, because the monitor is saying 0. Is there one more? All right. We're great. So thank you so much, Shahab. All right. Thank you.